Okay, hi everyone. In today's conversation with authors, this time I have two authors visiting my channel. It is Richard Swan and also James Logan or James
Hello.
Long. Some of you might know them, and Richard Swan is the author behind uh what's the name of the series? Empire of the World trilogy. Yeah.
And nobody
Yeah.
ever remembers the series title. I don't, this people always
and of
struggle with that.
course and of course James Long is the author behind James Logan is the author behind the upcoming Silverblood Promise.
Mm.
And yeah, feel free to introduce yourself first here.
James,
Start.
you go. You've got the
Oh,
book coming out.
that's very kind of you, Rich. Thanks.
That's all right.
Yeah. So yeah, hello. As Petrik said, yeah, I kind of wear two hats. So as James Long, I'm senior commissioning editor at Orbit UK, and I've been doing that role for about 14 years now.
Wow.
Rich is one of my many authors that I've published in that time.
Thanks, mate.
And then just one of many, Rich. You know, you're not special.
Sure, no.
You don't stand out.
You don't mean that.
I don't mean that. And then yeah, as James Logan, I write what I hope are very entertaining epic fantasy adventures. My debut novel, The Silverblood Promise, is coming out in next month actually, because it's now March, isn't it? So yeah,
Oh,
April,
blimey, yeah.
April 25th in the UK, being published by Joe Fletcher Books, and in May, early May, by Tor in the US. So yeah, lots happening, lots to look forward to. So
Very
do
cool.
check it out.
I'll introduce myself then. My name is Richard Swan, as you can see here. I am the author of the Empire of the Wolf trilogy. There's nobody can remember the title of that series, which consists of the Justice of Kings, Tyranny of Faith, and the very recently released Trials of Empire. Yes, yeah, very exciting. And some more books which have not been announced yet. So that's it for the moment. Yeah, just those three.
That's
And I
already
live.
amazing, man.
Thanks, man. Short and sweet.
And so before we really get started to the questions,
Hmm.
let's introduce your books first as spoiler-free as possible to the audience. So in case this is the first time they watch my channel and the first time they heard about your books, they will know about it. Let's start from Richard this time.
Okay. Justice of Kings follows the. Did you say as briefly as possible? Did I hear
Yeah.
that correctly? Okay.
Good luck trying to
Good luck. Good luck.
condense
4
this epic
years.
saga into like
Sure.
60 seconds.
Empire of the Wolf follows the tale of Sir Conrad von Volz. Sir Conrad is an Emperor's Justice. He's like a detective, sort of like a medieval policeman, judge, investigator, executioner, all in one. The story is told by his clerk, Helena, who is about 19 or 20 over the course of the trilogy. She's recounting the tale of her time with Sir Conrad as an old woman, as they tangle with a initially irritating and then very overtly malignant priest, Bartholomew Claver. And it's basically a kind of a murder mystery, and then like a political sort of drama, and then like just a flat out horror novel. By the time we close the trilogy out, so yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
I
How about you,
I
James?
love sorry, I was going to say I love how in Rich's series in the Justice of Kings you do get like a little bit of that kind of cosmic horror, just a little bit, you know. It's just it's there, but it's kind of, you know, not
Sprinkled on.
super sprinkled on. I like it, yeah, like that
Yeah.
Salt Bay thing.
Salt Bay.
Just is that what you do, Rich, when you're writing? You just kind of like you sit there and you're like, just sprinkle on
I
some of that
sort of
cosmic
handful
horror.
of sort of tokens of, you know, demons and angels and just sprinkle
just
them in.
sprinkle it on.
That's right.
But by the time of the third book, obviously, it's just full on, just
Yeah.
nightmare. You know,
We're just
monsters left,
leaning
right, and
into the
center.
epic. Yeah,
It's
you
just
know,
yeah.
it's just straight up epic fantasy at that point, isn't it?
But I think that's, I mean, well, sorry, without wanting to go off on a tangent so early on,
Welcome to tangent.
I kind of like and I love a good tangent, you know, I love a good tangent, but I do like how the Empire of the Wolf, I'm trying really hard not to say Empire of the Vampire, because as you know, I was,
You've just seen Jay.
at Jay
As have I.
Christoph's event last night, and I've got
Yes.
the new book behind me, and I'm super excited. So I'm just like, must remember, it's not Empire of the Vampire, it's Empire of the Wolf. Yeah, but I do like how it kind of starts quite small. Like, we've got Von Valt and Helena in the kind of provincial town, and
That's right.
doing a kind of murder investigation, and then it kind of grows over the course of 3 books into this like really big sprawling. I like the way. I think that it's really satisfying. I think from a reader's point of view, because you get a taste of the world, but it's not too much. I am totally going off on a tangent now, and I knew this would happen,
No, keep
but
going. I like it.
I'm just gonna roll with it. No, I think one of the mistakes I think that particularly sort of less experienced authors make is that they've created a really cool world, and they're really desperate to kind of show it off, and as a result they start the book by like hurling so much at you at once, and it can be really disorientating if they're mentioning people and places, and you don't have any real context for it, and very quickly it becomes disorientating. Whereas I think Justice of Kings is a really good example of world building where you are led in gradually, you are given plenty of interesting detail, but not too much. And the more you go into the story, the more the world opens up. And by the end, it's just, big, huge, like mayhem, right? But I think that's a really effective way of actually writing an epic fantasy series, taking that kind of approach to world building. So that was just off the top of my head while we
I
were
appreciated that. That's
talking about
lovely.
it. But
Yeah.
Richard,
gotta
is
say,
your book better than you?
Yeah, I know.
I had to edit the damn thing, so
Yeah, sure.
remember a fair amount.
Yeah, right.
Anyway,
Talk about your James. Talk about your book. I
well,
was just telling Petrik I haven't got around to reading it yet. I only just got my copy about a week ago.
I wasn't even sure. I didn't even know you had a copy. So that's
They did.
Good to
Well,
know.
Nadia asked me if I had seen it, and I said no one's offered it to me yet. And so, and then about 2 days later, it sort of turned up on my doorstep.
Yeah, have been kind of sort of wanting to strike, kind of keep up. Like in Ghostbusters, they're like, don't cross the streams, and I'm very much like, I don't want to kind of bombard like my own sort of authors that I work with copies of my book, being like, please read it and give me a quote, because that just doesn't seem quite right somehow.
You've got to leverage it, surely. Like you've got a tame group of people who are heavily invested in saying nice things.
Give me a quote, or I'm not renewing your contract.
That's right. Yeah,
exactly.
Doesn't
feel. I'm not sure that's quite. I'm not sure that's. Quite the right approach to take. But
it cuts both ways, doesn't it? Because if you didn't renew our contract, then we could just like torpedo it in the reviews.
Well, this is it.
Well?
Yeah, this is it. Yeah,
you've got a vulnerability now.
You very quickly get held to ransom and enter into all kinds of bargains, and it's going to go horribly wrong. But anyway, yes. So the Silverblood Promise, which I happen to have a copy of here. So there you go. Just very nice. Yeah. So the Silverblood Promise really is. It's I've been working on this book for so long, and like I almost forget kind of how it even started or where it sort of came from. But like the actual story, follows character called Logan Gardova, who is sort of down on his luck. He's kind of aristocrat, but he's become estranged from his family and from his father, and he's been kicked out the academy for a duel that went wrong, and he's sort of become a bit of a roamer, kind of just traveling around doing bits and pieces, and just trying to figure out how to kind of put his life back together. And he then one day receives word that his father has been murdered by persons unknown, and he's realized that he no longer has the chance now to kind of make things right. He can no longer kind of rebuild that relationship and kind of get things back to the way they were. And the only thing that he can really do is to kind of try and figure out who actually is behind his father's murder and try and attain some kind of justice for him. And that's kind of what he decides to do, and kind of finds fresh purpose in his life to kind of to make this his goal. And his father left a very cryptic message written in his own blood with 3 words on it, one of which was Lucan. Obviously the message was meant for Lucan. The second word was Sophrona, which is a city down at the very southern tip of the old empire. And the third word was Zandrusa. And Lucan has no idea what Zandrusa means. It could be a place, could be a person. He hasn't got a clue. But it seems pretty obvious he needs to go to Sophrona and try and figure out who or what Zandrusa is. And so he does, and thus starts a kind of a quest into which will lead him into various from the kind of glittering heights of Sophrona down to its seedy underbelly. And the more that Lucan delves into this mystery, the more trouble he finds himself in. And he ends up being, not to give away too many spoilers, he ends up being kind of tangled up in a conspiracy that might start a war. So it's kind of a bit like Richard's series. It kind of starts with a small kind of concept that grows gradually bigger. And my intent is over the series to kind of I want kind of each book to try and stand alone as much as possible, but have an
Uh-huh.
overarching sort of plot story that will sort of
That's the
gradually
best
sort of
way.
take center stage and resolve itself. So, but really, I just hopefully it's just kind of like action adventure fantasy, packed with mystery and intrigue and snarky sidekicks, and I just tried to pack it full of all the kind of stuff that I like to love to read. I think writing the kind of thing that you love to read is a really good starting point for any writer. Really, it's a kind of so this is the kind of book I love to read. It's the kind of book I love to see on submission. I just tried to pack it full of all my favorite stuff, really. So hopefully people will enjoy it.
Well, I do. All of you.
Thank you, Petrik.
Petrik did, yeah.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, so
I thought it was a piece of shit. I actually haven't. I was joking.
Maybe you will think that. Maybe you will think that. In which case
Oh, well,
you
I
just
might
keep that
do.
to yourself, Rich.
It's unlikely,
Keep that
but
to yourself.
what if Richard hated it?
it's really the thing is, you know what? I almost certainly won't. But I actually don't. I'm not a huge fantasy reader though either. Like I don't.
Mm.
I've never. I read a lot of. Well, I read a moderate amount of fantasy in my teens, but I've
Oh.
always been way more of a sci-fi reader than a fantasy reader, and sci-fi has always been my genre. Writing and reading, and Justice of the Kings was the first fantasy novel I ever wrote. And so, I don't read a tremendous amount of fantasy, and it's ironic because now I just get loads of free fantasy books left, right, and center, and they're just kind of like sort of slowly stacking up, and I'm like, I don't want to read a lot of these. Like, this has nothing to do with the quality of the novels. It's just more me. I don't really, I just don't like a lot of it. Not because I think it's bad, but it just, it's never been my kind of thing. So, but I will. I'm certain I'll enjoy James. I think it'll be fantastic.
It's interesting though, Rich, that kind of you're more of a science fiction reader and writer, and yet it was fantasy that you kind of the door opened for
Yeah.
you in terms of traditional publishing, which I know is always very much a goal of yours to be traditionally published,
Yeah.
even though you started out self-published. But you kind of, I know it's funny the way it works out, isn't it? You just
It
kind of
is.
you go through the doors that are open, and that one was very much open at the time, and so
Definitely. And what also I think, but also I mean, I look back at that and I think I'm so glad that I sort of came into that way as well. I mean, not only because I think fantasy is a much more lucrative genre than sci-fi, generally speaking, there's sort of more money to be made in that. Which is not why I did it, but it enabled me to do. It opened up more doors for me and it gave me a lot more freedom to write full time in a way that, like, say, a 5K a book sci-fi trilogy just wouldn't have, and then I'd still be lawyering. So, in that respect, it was probably the best thing that could have happened for me personally. And now I've had years to kind of build up actually a massive, quite annoyingly massive backlog of finished novels now, which I can't move for love of the money because it's all so slow. But yeah, no, I'm really glad that I came in through fantasy, and now I enjoy writing the fantasy. It's just I write the fantasy that I kind of put my own, the themes that I kind of do. It's all like civics and jurisprudence and into foreign relations and public international law. And so I thought, right, fuck it, I'm just gonna do what I like and shove that on. And I'm gonna give everybody a civics lesson basically over the course of like 3 books. That's what I'm gonna do. But I have really enjoyed it. And James is
I wonder, Rich, like whether sort of you maybe not being completely familiar with, I don't know, current trends in fantasy maybe in some way helped you because
100%.
you weren't necessarily, because one of the things I see as an editor a lot is you do see people writing for the market, and I understand that. I understand it. I mean, people want to be published. They want to have a writing career, and it makes sense to kind of write something that is hot at the moment. But the way I feel about it is, I never think you should write for the market, but I do think you should write being aware of where your book sits in the market, which is not quite the same thing.
No.
But I think for you, because you sort of came in and like you'd obviously read fantasy before, and you're a fan, but maybe just not as plugged into the current state of the market as maybe some writers were. And I think that meant that you just you were more kind of content to do your own thing and actually not necessarily be led by certain market forces at the time and the tropes, because tropes is such a massive thing at the moment. And I think because you maybe weren't really necessarily connected to that as strongly, it maybe meant that you were more you just had more confidence in doing your own thing, which I think one of the things that very very, very vividly remember reading Justice of Kings on submission. It was like
Mm.
September 2020.
You were
Everything
Greenwich
was
Park, weren't you? I remember you
I
saying.
was, yeah.
Yeah.
This was the middle of the pandemic, so everything was just completely horrible.
Mm,
And we were kind of going out for the day for like the first time in about 6 months or something.
mm,
So just ludicrously excited just to be on a train going somewhere. But I remember like reading the first few pages, and I always think, with pretty much with everything that I've acquired in my editorial career, I have
mm.
always known 9 times out of 10, you know very quickly, like
Sure.
whether something has got legs or not. Like normally
Yeah,
within
yeah.
a few pages, you can just tell if it's
Mm,
got that kind of special sauce, whatever it is. And I can never
mm.
explain what that is, which I know is really frustrating for agents, because they're like, "What do you mean when you kind
I'll
of say
know
the
when I
X
see it.
factor?" Or
Yeah,
yeah, no,
that's
but it is. It's like I
it
can't
is.
explain it. I cannot
No.
explain it. I just know it when I
Mm,
see it. It is a sense
mm,
that the author just knows what they're doing, and you know you
mm.
can trust them, and you are in safe hands somehow. It's really hard to kind of explain it, but you just know it when you see it. And I very
Yeah,
much
yeah,
got that from Justice of Kings. I've read a few pages, and I just like, yeah, this is definitely whatever it
yeah.
is. It's got it. And I think that
Listen
might
to this.
be. He's paying me to say this, like, so
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
the
Thanks,
check's in
man.
the mail, right? The
This is
check's in the mail,
this is all perfectly to the script. Excellent,
but
How
James.
much
Thank
did
you.
you
what I'm
bribe
Yeah, I
him?
know, right? Well, I'm in the
but
unique position though where James bought the book, so he has to
I
like
have to
it.
I have to like it. Um, but I think that that impact that it made on me in those
Mm,
first few pages, I think probably it links back to the fact that you weren't coming in with any real preconceived ideas necessarily
no,
of
that's
the
it.
genre or of what you were trying to do. It was very much,
Totally.
I know that the book started from a short story, and you were like, oh, this is
Mm,
kind of cool, I like it,
mm.
I'm going to turn it into a novel. And I just
Yeah,
feel that maybe you followed a different path to some other authors, and that I think that meant that the identity of the book stood out a bit more, maybe.
yeah, yeah.
And
I
obviously
think
there's
that's
many other
true. Yeah.
reasons why it did, but I
Mm.
just think that's an interesting point, actually.
Yeah, definitely. No, that's great. I appreciate that.
That's the
Do you
last
think
nice
like
thing I'm saying about your book. I'm not saying anything
No,
nice
no,
about
keep
it after
going.
this.
Let's.
The
I like it. Let's.
next hour and a half or whatever, I'm just gonna just
Yes,
not
Petrik.
refuse to
No,
talk
Petrik
about
say something like.
it.
so
I'll let
you've been editing for 14 years now, James?
I have, yeah. So, yep, 2010, December 2010 was when I first started. So yeah, it's been nearly 15 years or 14 years. So it's gone. I mean, it's gone really fast.
Didn't you
And do
get
you
Sorry,
to?
think
Rich.
your job as an editor really helps you in your writing?
I think they're very different things. I mean, I
Different
think
things.
I think you would think that I think some people might think that because I'm an professional editor and have been for many years, that I can edit my own work or whatever. But
Hmm.
no, you not really. You can't.
Yeah,
You get
No.
far too close to it, and you
yeah.
absolutely. I did so many edits on Silverblood, and even like I've read that book so many times and done so many passes on it. And even on the seventh or eighth pass or whatever, I was still finding things that like didn't make sense, or the editor would be
Mm.
like, how does this work? And and you just kind of think, how did I not notice that? How did I miss it? But
Yeah.
you become. I'm sure Rich will know. Like you become
Mm.
completely blind to the point where, and I certainly got to this point with Silverblood where I was like, I'm now kind of making changes to this book, and I honestly can't tell anymore whether they are making it better or worse. And when
Oh,
that happens, that the time comes to just let go of it because you just
Yeah, yeah.
can't be sure anymore. But I think to answer maybe a more broader question, Petrik, like in terms
yeah.
of because I know this is going to come up a lot probably in sort of promotional work that I do, because obviously I am in a slightly not a unique position, because I'm certainly not the first editor to have written a book and had it published, but it's an unusual position to kind of
Yeah.
be both an editor in the industry and an author in the industry. It's not a particularly common one, and I think I know people are going to be interested in to what extent did my kind of background sort of help my writing career. And I think really like the main way I think the main way it did, other than the fact that obviously I know a lot of people, and like publishing is like any other industry, the more people you know, the more doors potentially open. It's as simple as that. Like it's not different to any other industry, but um, certainly doesn't mean you automatically get a free pass. I mean, if your book sucks, like no one's going to
I was
buy it,
gonna say
regardless
the
of
book still
if
has to be good enough to be published,
of course it
doesn't
does.
it?
Yeah, like
Yeah, like
of course it does. Like it
yeah.
doesn't, it doesn't. It makes certain things easier, perhaps, but it doesn't. Certainly, by no means just guarantees you a book deal.
Mm.
Like the book has got to be really good. So yeah. But I think where it has helped is I think having coming from an editorial background, I know that how the industry works. I know how tight budgets are. I know how busy everyone is, and so as a result, I've managed to kind of manage my own expectations. Rich, you once described me as the king of managing
I did.
expectations, which
You said
which
you were
which
gonna. You said you were gonna have it on your
I,
tombstone.
I am going to have it on my tombstone. Yeah. You know.
Maybe too much, almost to the point of pessimism. I said
Yeah,
you
possibly,
can be a bit of a
possibly.
misery gut sometimes. Harry and I were speaking about this before, so it's just James being James.
I think, yeah. I mean, it's a hard balance to get right, you know. But
Yeah.
I think
Mm,
one of the key things I think in an author-editor relationship is kind of trying to manage expectations, not just the authors, but also the kind of the agents, but also kind of yours as well. And it's really, I think it's important to kind of try and ensure that everyone roughly is kind of has the same expectation as to, you know, what you think,
mm,
how the book is going to perform, and how certain things are going to be. And it's tough because everyone has their own ideas, and particularly as you know, the author will always have an emotional investment in it that you don't have. So I think, you know, I think managing expectations is really important as best you can. And so I think where my writing background helped me was I'm coming into it already knowing that I know budgets are tight. I know printing costs have gone up massively. I know that people are really busy, and you know, I know that I'm not always going to get my way on everything. You know, like, so coming in with those kind of already having that knowledge
mm,
and understanding has just meant that I've been able to kind of, I've probably found it a lot easier than I think many writers who come into the industry and have no knowledge of it. I probably had an easier time of it as a result, because you know, if
mm.
something goes wrong or something happens, it's not really a surprise to me. It's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, that, you know, that can happen sometimes. Whereas a new writer would just be like, oh no, what's going on? Like, how has this
Uh,
happened, kind of thing. But I know
Yeah.
these things can happen, you know, without being too specific about anything. So I think that's where kind of my editorial sort of background has helped the most. Yeah.
and Richard, do you clash ideas with something that James suggested?
Oh, never.
Oh, really?
No, I'm
Really?
very. No, you know what? Like I get a book to a point where it's about. I've been writing for really like the same with James and I guess most writers. We've been writing for a super long time. The
Mm,
difference is for like many years it's just been a hobby. And so I'm kind of very au fait with the writing process. And what I tend to do is I get a book to about I'm about like 80% there. Well, I'm about 80% happy with it as a first draft. And not like 100, you never be 100, but like 75, 80. And then I think, right, I have got to the point where I don't know what, I don't even know what's going on with this thing anymore. Like, I just need someone else to have a look at it. And sometimes you just get a bit of like a crisis of faith in your own work occasionally. We're like, is this shit? Like, if I just
Mhm.
written a big steaming pile of shit,
I'm pretty sure every single author goes through that. I
it's
certainly have been doing that with my
unavoidable.
second book. Like,
Mm,
literally had a
I'm
two
a
or three
hack.
month period. Yeah. I
Yeah.
literally had I literally had a 2 or 3 month period when I'm working on the second book where I'm just like, this is terrible. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, is this is actually rubbish, and it's going
I
to
fluked
completely
my way through.
yeah. Like, I fluked the first one. I
Yeah.
somehow, like, you know, like, I just fluked it, and now
Yeah.
I don't know what I'm doing, and I'm going to torpedo my own career. And you
Mm,
have to kind of keep going with that playing out in your mind for like
mm,
sometimes weeks and months on end, and
that's
you get
right.
through it. But I know that I know that most writers go through that at some point. I know
Yeah, yeah.
Joe Abercrombie has said that he has hated every single book he's ever written. At some
yeah.
point during the process, he
Right.
hated it and was convinced it was rubbish. So I think,
Yes.
you know, we all do it. We all do
I
it.
think, and that's the beauty of the editorial process is, of course, you get someone who comes and the letters can be long, the letters can be short. They can say this needs work and this doesn't. But I don't think I ever want to get to a point where I think I'm above
Mm,
editorial.
Mm,
mm,
I don't think anybody is above editorial, and I
mm,
will never name names, but like, so I've obviously been reading for many years as well as writing, and you can tell
yeah.
the sort of longer an author has been writing, you see their books get longer. There's more bloat in them. The editorial foot has come off the pedal slightly. And it's always in those later years of the writer's career where everything is just taking a step back, and it's often the weakest way. I never want to get to that point. I always want to listen to it, and you don't have to agree on every point. Like James will say something like, for example, this paragraph can probably just go in its entirety. It's way too long, I'll say I kind of agree with you, but at the same time, I love this paragraph, and so
uh,
I'm gonna indulge it, and then I'm gonna knowing full well that maybe it doesn't. But I think you ignore an editor at your peril,
yeah.
and so no, Jay, I think we don't. I don't think we clashed on anything. Actually, I tend to just look at the recommendations, and be like, yeah, fine, and just do them all.
I mean,
Because
yeah,
otherwise, what's the point?
well, this is it. I mean, this is it, and I completely agree with Rich that you can tell, I think, when an author has kind of stopped taking, either they've stopped wanting editorial feedback, or the editor has just kind of thought, it's going to sell 1 million copies, don't really need to bother, or it's
Yeah.
some combination of the two. You don't really know, but you can tell when editorial advice is not either not being given or not being followed. You really can, and I think, broadly speaking, like in my experience, I have found most authors to be very welcoming of feedback and very willing to kind of. But I think it might partly be because, like, I personally try to take quite a light editorial touch, like, and that's not to say that I don't kind of do the editorial work. It's more just I I try to take as light a touch as possible, because I really believe that the book is the author's vision, and the editor's job is to help hone the vision, not impose their own vision. So
Yeah.
I'll make loads of suggestions and stuff for how to improve it, but it's always kind of like, the way I position it is kind of like, I think you should do this thing because it will make the book better for this reason. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. It's your book, but I think you should. But it's up to you. So
Well, I
that,
strongly recommend that you.
yeah. So, like, 90% of my comments on a manuscript are in that kind of vein. It's like, this would be a good thing to do, but I'm happy to leave it with you. But sometimes, like, there will be something where I will put my foot down and I'll be like, I really, really recommend you make this change. And if you don't want to make the change, then we need to have a conversation, because I really think the book is going to be problematic for some reason if we don't do it. That's only, the dreaded word. It's and the dreaded phrase is, I have concerns. I think concerns is like
Right.
the word that always makes me kind of like just shrivel into a ball slightly whenever I hear it. But I think, no, I mean, by and large, like, I've I think there's only been like 2 or 3 times in my entire career where, like, I've said to an author, you absolutely have to make this change, and I am not gonna sort of be okay with you not making it. Unfortunately, they've always made the change, and so I've never found out what happens if they come back and say no. I'm sure it'll happen at some point, but we'll worry about that when the time comes. But I think I think, like, the editorial processes, I think, for Empire of the Wolf trilogy was
Not
I thought was
vampire.
pretty. I know. I did just take a pause there to make
You
sure
did.
I
I
had the
heard
right word. But I think from what I remember, I think the editorial process of both books was very smooth. Like, the first one, I think I just
Yeah,
said
it
to you,
was.
like, there's a few things that feel a little bit convenient, and also, can you add 20,000 words because it's really short, and you did,
Yes.
and that was great. And then
And
the
job
second,
done.
actually, we did do a lot of work on the second one, because I remember, like, that, I
We had
think
to
out of the 3
undo a lot of work.
we had to,
That was
I think out of the 3 books, it was the difficult middle one that I think, that the difficult second novel, which I think caused us the most kind of trouble at the time. But it wasn't even that big a deal. It was more of a case of, all of the elements are here, they just need to be refined a bit and kind of
yeah.
rearranged slightly. And
It
there's
was
lots of
too
cool.
fast.
Yeah, there's lots of cool stuff that was happening, but it was happening off screen. We wanted to happen on screen, so there was quite a lot of work involved in that. But I think
Yeah.
I actually think that's my favourite of the 3, funnily enough, which is often the way. It's often the way that the book you end up doing the most work on does often end up, I think, being the strongest one. But no, I think Tyranny is possibly my favourite. But
Tyranny is
we did,
Tyranny is definitely the best book of the trilogy. There's no question in my mind about it. But it's difficult, isn't it? They all 3 books do different things, and I think
yeah.
sorry, Petrik, this is your interview. We don't. I don't. I
No, it's okay. Good.
just want to literally just talk for about 15 minutes about the trilogy. They do different things, don't they? Because the first one is just like a murder mystery, essentially. And the second one is like the second book's always my favorite. And I found this as my first my self-published trilogy as well. The middle book is generally the better received of that trilogy as well. And I like second books because you're expanding the world, right? So you're getting more of the good stuff. The story isn't finished yet, so you have another book to look forward to if it's a trilogy. So you've got that nice kind of, oh, I'm loving this, and there's a whole other book to look forward to as well. So it's got that feel good factor. The key balancing act with the second book in any trilogy is it's got 2 plot lines. It's got the overarching plot line, the trilogy plot line, and then it's got to
Yeah.
have a story that finishes in the second book to give you enough closure to tie that off and make it a satisfactory reading experience. Some people get that and some people don't. Hence with the sort of middle book syndrome, which is one of my most detested phrases in reviewing, because it's just this utterly tropified phrase that people just throw out left, right, and centre without like properly engaging with the text, in my opinion. And I think we just nailed Tyranny. Like everything just came together really nicely, and I had a really good idea for the both elements of those plot lines. Whereas Trials was just much more of an epic fantasy, because I think ultimately when you have a storyline that's a mystery, you've got, okay, so by the end of book one, it's like, well, Claver's a threat. We need to sort of sort this out. Book two, it's like, oh fuck, he's a serious threat. Like, but we've got all this stuff being thrown in the way. And then it's like book three, the mystery has been removed. Now you're just finishing the story, and you can't have a situation where you're like, and now it's another mystery, or it's another. At that point, it just becomes contrivance. You've just got to have the characters and then solving the problem. And I think so. Book three, I was just like, you know what? I'm going to lean into it. It's going to be the big battle. This is my Pelennor Fields. I'm gonna, gonna have the big battle for Sova, and of course there's a trial in it because we've got to have the kind of the legal procedural aspect. But there's three different books. There's three different things, and I do like to have each book in a trilogy have a slightly different angle as well. Like to have had three Justice of Kings, which I think probably quite a lot of people actually would have liked to read, sure, it would have been okay, but I think it would have been ultimately a less reading. So you got to have a bit of variety in the trilogy, I think, and the format of the trilogy. But having said all of that, I do think Tyranny is my favorite novel. I think it accomplishes what it sets out to do tremendously well. And I think the ultimate ratings, insofar as we care about those, will reflect. It will reflect that that reality. Which is fine.
Well, I do think it is my favorite as well. Tyranny of Faith.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I
truly.
think it's most people's
It's really
favorite
good.
of the trilogy. Yeah.
I remember for the third book, the editorial process for that was very smooth, actually, and I didn't really have a huge amount of kind of real sort of meaty things to say. But I do remember saying to you, Rich, there's so much blood in this book, so much blood, so much brains. I'm sure I wrote a comment saying something like, do we really need the brains to splatter over the floor again?
Yeah, it was. And
a
you know
bit
what? Because the writing process is so iterative, right? So you sit down and you
Yeah.
write like 3,000 words. So you kind of forget
You lose sense, right? You
what
totally forget. Yeah.
what you've
Yeah.
described previously, and you were absolutely right. And after a while, it becomes a bit edgy. I think what I was trying
Yeah.
to achieve,
Edgy.
you're being a bit of an edgelord, aren't you? All you're doing is describing gore. I think I like when I'm writing battles or fights, I want it to be extremely gory because they would have been. And often, like, even if fiction doesn't hold a candle to the reality of, I remember reading about the Battle of Tadworth, which was the last battle of the Wars of the Roses. So sort of the 15th century in England, and they had unearthed all the skeletons in the wherever it was, Yorkshire or whatever, and they had found the molars of they were so frightened that they had buckled their molars from gritting their teeth. They had one skeleton who had lost both legs under the knee to a great sword, and just you write that in a book and people think, oh, this guy thinks he's Quentin Tarantino, like trying to impress me with his like bloody, but it really was that horrible. You cannot capture, and so I like to kind of capture that. But of course, if you do it too much, the reader just starts to kind of gloss over it after a while and say that was a great call. I mean, it was too much. It was like, oh, and then there's a brain kind of sloshed, and I was like, yeah, okay, well, yeah, whatever. Like, we get the point,
I actually studied the Wars of the Roses at sort of A level, actually.
Oh yeah.
It's really fascinating, and like as a result, it's kind of like you can see where George R. R. Martin has borrowed heavily. Like he's admitted that he's borrowed heavily, but you can in sort of when Viserys, I'm not going to give spoiler warnings. I'm pretty sure everyone's seen Game of Thrones by now, but
Oh
like
God,
when
if they don't know by now, then
they don't know, yeah.
fuck 'em.
Well, it's just quite funny because last night Jay Christoph was like talking about the original OG Star Wars films. He was like, "Spoiler alert!" It's like pretty sure everyone's seen them by now.
Yeah.
You know? I mean, he was
Darth
doing it
Vader.
ironically, to be
Yeah,
fair,
sure.
but like, you know, when Viserys has the crown of gold, you know, when they pour the molten gold over his head, and it's like that. There's like a real parallel with like the Duke of Clarence in Wars of the Roses when. It wasn't the same thing, but they drowned. He was well known for his love of Malmsey wine, and so they drowned him in a vat of wine. Just kind of like
Blimey.
marched him up to it and just dumped him in it and just held him down and drowned him in it. And I do wonder whether that's where the crown of gold thing came from, because there's
Right.
kind of a similar. You know, Viserys loved gold, wanted to be a king, so they murder him with gold. Clarence loved wine, so they murder him in a vat of wine. There's something quite, you know, there's parallels there. But it's
Poetic
interesting you
justice,
mentioned
yeah.
about those the molars and stuff, because I'm a bit of a history nerd. 'Cause I did it at university, and I also remember I can't remember whether this was from whether it was Agincourt or whether it was one of the Wars of the Roses battles, but they excavated some of the skeletons. And sorry, Petrik, this is getting way off topic, but you know, we'll get back onto books in a minute.
Sure.
But I love they excavated some skeletons, and like it turned out they were archers, and they knew they were archers because the left arm was
Yeah.
was because drawing back the
Shoulder and
bow, the shoulder and the
Mm,
arm was just so much more developed, like much more
yeah, the
muscular
bone
because of the
density was
tension
higher, yeah.
and exactly because of
Mm,
drawing back the longbow and having to hold it, and you know, there's a lot of power involved in that.
mm.
It's fascinating what you can tell from kind of, you know, that kind of thing.
Sure.
Anyway, books, writing,
Yeah,
editing.
go on, Petrik.
Go
That's a
on,
question.
Petrik.
but about the crown of no, this is still out of tangent, but I just want to talk about the crown of gold thing. I think
Mm.
George Martin got that from the Mongolian invasion because
Oh, did he? Right.
Genghis Khan did
Interesting.
the exactly same thing
Right.
to one of the country
There you
that he
go.
conquered. Yeah, so that's probably from there. But I didn't know about
Oh,
the one
yeah,
that you mentioned.
that's super interesting. Also, there I know that in the Roman time of the Roman Empire, and there was a Roman governor, and I think it was in Pontus, which is now kind of like modern day sort of Turkey, I think. But there was a Roman governor there who was well known for being corrupt, and when the kind of I don't know what you would say, Pontins. I'm not quite sure what the actual term would be, but when the kind of Roman rule was overthrown, they captured the Roman governor, and because he was well known for his love of gold, they poured molten
Mm.
gold down his throat, made him swallow it. So
Ah,
yeah,
Blimey.
pretty
Okay.
brutal stuff. But I love history for that reason. There's just like so much like really just horrible stuff that
Yeah.
happens,
yeah.
and you can just read
Yeah.
it and be like, I'm glad that's not me.
Yeah.
Also full of ideas for plundering, as you know, as we know. So.
That's right.
Yeah.
Mm.
Has becoming an author for you to kind of like ruin your enjoyment of reading? Because some authors definitely experience that from reading. They cannot read fantasy books the same way anymore.
For me personally, sort of is the answer.
Mm.
If I don't, the thing is, as I say, I still don't read a tremendous amount of fantasy. So, if I do, I kind
Mm.
of, yeah, I'm kind of. Part of the reason I don't like to read a lot of fantasy, not only because in general doesn't interest me, but also is I don't want to feel myself becoming kind of informed by it and influenced by it, and kind of in some ways I like to not know what a lot of my peers are doing, so that
Ah,
I'm kind of
yeah.
actually a more sort of clean mental slate. So, but it definitely can make you more alive. I think it's most acute in reading books by people I know.
Mm.
Then I'm kind of I'm much more. I can hear the book being sort of spoken in their voice, and it kind of takes me out of the experience a little bit. But that's
Like
not always it.
James.
Not, well, I haven't read it yet, so I don't think so though. I think that one will be fine. And it's not always like I know Jay Christophe and I are sort
Oh,
of
yeah,
really good
yeah.
friends, and
Oh,
I lo-
shut up! Dropping
I
that name, goodness me.
well, I was I was going to say because I read Empire of the Vampire recently because obviously I did his Australian. I was in conversation with him for his Australian leg of the tour,
Mm,
Ah.
and that was such a fantastic novel, but B, such a strong voice, and
Uh-huh.
it was done so internally well and consistently that I never heard Jay
mm.
in that tech, which I guess is a really sort of good indication of the novel, that it stood so well by itself, and So it's not always the case, but sometimes it can be the case.
Hmm.
So yeah, it can do. It depends on what kind of mood I'm in and whose book it is in particular. But generally speaking, I don't think so. No.
I
Hmm.
think it's interesting. I think for me, like, because I've been an editor for so long, like,
Hmm.
I think it's something that people talk about actually a lot. Like when you move into publishing, like I think one of the sort of sacrifice. I mean, it's a creative industry, so there are several sacrifices you have to make. But I think what to work in. But I think one of them, I think that is commonly held, is that it can kind of impact on your enjoyment of books, I guess, because when you spend all day working on books, it might be that actually the last thing you kind of want to do in your spare time is actually read one, like,
Oh.
Mm,
because you spend so long looking at.
yeah. Right.
But so that's definitely a thing, and I think I have felt that to some extent. I think sort of reading for pleasure kind of has become a little bit more difficult, I suppose, for me,
Yeah.
because I feel maybe less inclined to want to pick up a book, simply because I've been immersed in books all day, possibly. But at the same
Mm,
time, like when something comes out that I'm super excited about, I'll just dive straight into it. So I don't know, but I don't know. Like I certainly don't feel the kind of thing, the dynamic where sort of an author is like, oh, I don't want to read kind of, I'm a fantasy author and I don't want to read any fancy books because I don't want to be influenced or
Oh.
I just don't feel that at all. Like I love
mm,
fantasy, I always have done. I can't really get enough of it, and so. I just that's never been a thing for me. I'm always keen to kind of read other things because just it's inspiring. It's like when if I'm reading like a book that I'm really enjoying, like I just reread sort of Empire of the Vampire, and like I just think that is such a kind of tour de force of like epic fantasy, and like reading something like that, not just as an editor but as an author, you just kind of come away from it thinking, this is how it's done, and
mm,
this is the kind of level I really want to try and hit one day, and like and so I find
mm.
that kind of thing inspiring. Like,
Yeah,
but
definitely.
each to their own. Like, I understand why some authors might just want to completely stay away from it. But I don't know. I've always felt it slightly. I always felt it slightly strange that, like, for an author to like just not read in the genre that they write in at all.
Oh.
Like,
Mm.
I've always just found that a little odd because I don't know, like, I just, I just,
You
it's
saying I'm
it's not
odd, James?
something. No, because you
I
do
do.
read,
I do read in it.
fantasy.
Not
I
much,
think
but I still
not
do.
not much, but you do kind
Yeah,
of
yeah.
keep your sort of
And there are
your
some
sort
books
of
I am looking
foot
forward,
in.
like genuinely do look
Yeah,
forward to.
yeah,
Like I have
yeah.
ordered like Gog Magog, which I think looks really cool.
Mm,
Ah,
mm,
yeah. Got
Um,
yeah.
yeah, and there's a couple like I genuinely do, but I think also what it does do is it makes the books that you do look forward to kind of even more special
yeah,
because
yeah.
Mm.
it's made me very selective about what I'm a very slow reader.
Mm,
So I really enjoyed China Miéville's novels, and I only
oh,
picked up
yeah.
Imperial Street Station a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed it. But it took me about 2 months to read the thing because it's about 1,000 pages
Yeah.
long.
I mean,
And
that's a massive book.
it's a
Perdido
big
is
old, it's a big
huge,
old
isn't
book.
it?
And
Yeah,
Empire of the
yeah.
Vampire I read very quickly, A, because I had to, because I was
Because I
trying
had
to do it in 2 weeks.
to.
Yeah.
And B, ended up being in hospital for a kind of dramatic and non-life threatening reason. So I had a ton of time to get through it, and that immersive reading experience actually was really good because it kind of totally consumed me, and I really enjoyed it. But I do think that I'm very selective about the books I do read, and so when I do pick a book to read, I do genuinely then really look forward to it. So I do have like a few ones that I am really looking forward to. And there's always like some fantasy. Like I'll always recommend Senlin Ascent. I think it's one of the best modern fantasy novels
Mm.
written. Like I loved that novel, and I love
Yeah.
championing the novels that I really enjoy as well. Like, and I love recommending them. So there's always. I think to not read any fantasy would be definitely weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I don't think I would sit down and say, right, I'm going to read a fantasy novel, and therefore, I'm going to start reading broadly in the genre to see what sort of thing is getting published these days. Although having said that, that's probably quite good advice. It's still not something I would, still not something I would do. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I
I'm a bit
don't know
weird.
necessarily like whether like it's. I suppose on some level it's helpful to kind of keep up with what is being published and so on. But I don't know. I just think if you kind of write in that genre, like surely you enjoy it and you'd want to kind of read it as well from time to time. But some authors
certainly.
just don't. Some authors just don't. They don't want, and that's fine. I mean, each to their own.
It's not fine, James.
But
come on, take a position.
it's fine. It's fine. But I mean, for all, I just love it, and I can kind of get up and write for an hour and a half on my own work, and then on my own writing, and then do a full day of kind of editing or being immersed in that kind of editorial job, and then in the evening I can like read for an hour or something, like and I can do that. And I maybe some people, that's just not for them, and that's fine. But I can't get enough of. I just have always loved this stuff from a very young age, and it's what I do, it's what I enjoy, and I can't I can't get enough of it. So, but that's just me. So
Yeah.
Your mileage may vary.
And about trends, do you think we have fewer epic fantasy published now in the traditional published market? Because there are some people saying that it's been getting harder to find new epic fantasy published, new republished epic fantasy novel.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like, I think at the moment there is very much a focus on like romantasy is huge at the moment. I think we all know that. It's exploded. It's huge. Cozy fantasy as well has also really taken off. I think, to be honest, I think none of this is surprising. We went through a pandemic, and that followed a lot of kind of years of like quite intense political turmoil as well. If you live in the UK or the US, and a lot of people felt quite just upset about that. And so I think all of those things kind of happening in consecutive years, it's just, I'm not surprised that people have gravitated towards things that feel a bit lighter, a bit cozier, a bit just warmer. Also, grimdark, the whole grimdark movement was such a big thing for many years, like Game of Thrones, and then all of that stuff dominated for like the better part of a decade or something. So again, it's not remotely surprising. And I remember thinking a few years ago, even before all of this happened, I remember thinking at some point people are going to gravitate towards lighter kind of things, and maybe even more kind of classic fantasy, going back to. It kind of is. I mean, I think the classic fantasy thing hasn't quite happened yet, but I'm starting to see signs that it is. Well, I know that there is a really massive readership for this kind of, it's not gone away. It's not like all anyone's interested in now is like romantasy and cozy fantasy and so on. Like that readership for those kind of grittier novels, like is still 100% there. But I feel at the moment it's not necessarily being that well catered for by traditional publishing, because traditional publishing has such a focus on the romantasy and also on diverse voices as well, and quite right, because goodness knows, like fantasy being written by white men for like decades, but so that kind of thing is long, that sort of embracing of diversity and underrepresented authors is long overdue, obviously, but there is still a massive readership for that kind of Game of Thrones sort of grimdark kind of storytelling. And I think as a result, because they're not being that well serviced by traditional publishing at the moment, they've gravitated away towards self-publishing. And I think a lot of self-publishing and indie publishing now, I think, is where a lot of that kind of grittier fantasy, darker fantasy is being published, and where readers have kind of had to flock to. So I enjoy that kind of fantasy a lot. That's the kind of fantasy I enjoy, and so I try to do my bit, to kind of accommodate that kind of audience. And obviously, Richard's novels is one of those series that we've published. But no, it's funny. I mean, there is authors like John Gwynne and Anthony Ryan and Rich himself just do sell extremely well. So the audience is there. It's just that the focus is kind of not really on it at the moment. But I think it'll come back. I think the romantasy and cozy fantasy, like, it's publishing moves in cycles like most things, and I think sooner or later people will start wanting kind of books with higher stakes again, and maybe a slightly harder edge, and so the needle will move.
They'll be back.
They'll be back. Yeah, I mean, someone's got to buy my book, so I really hope it does.
That's right.
But this is really interesting, actually, just thinking about it. One of the things I found, because obviously, it's a couple of months out from publication for Silverblood Promise now, and starting to kind of get reviews and people engaging with it, and it's all terrific. It's wonderful. But one thing I found really interesting is you see, like, seeing how people, and Rich, you've probably seen this as well. It's really fascinating seeing how people view your own book, and kind of how it differs to how you view it. Because I've had a few reviews where people have labelled the book as grimdark, which I find fascinating because I don't think it is. I
Yeah.
don't even particularly like grimdark, really. I think of grimdark as more of an aesthetic anyway, rather than a subgenre. But I think I think what it is because of the move towards cozy fantasy and romantasy. I think we've got to a point where anything that is kind of remotely has a harder edge, even if
Mm,
it's not super dark or super gritty, but
mm,
anything with remotely an edge to it suddenly gets labeled as grimdark because
Yeah.
it's not the
totally
other
agree.
thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
Which is really which I think is fascinating because
Mm,
Silverblood does have a bit of an edge to it at times. Like the stakes are quite high. Some people die in not very nice ways, and it has that kind of sort of a bit of darkness to it and a bit of an edge to it, but it also has a huge amount of heart, I think, and a lot of
mm.
humor in it. And I just don't think for 1 minute it fits that kind of grimdark aesthetic, which I see as very much being nihilism, kind of just
Just
misery, and
relentlessly bleak.
relentless. I wouldn't even.
Yeah.
This is interesting because I wouldn't even say, Rich, that Empire of the Wolf is necessarily grimdark, because
Oh, it
although
isn't.
it's very bloody, it's very
Yeah, yeah, it
violent at
isn't.
times, but it's got clearly defined good guys and bad guys,
Correct.
good against evil. That
Yeah, yeah.
definition is very clear. There's no
Absolutely.
shades of grey. It's not a book where everyone is horrible. I think there's a very
No.
clear sort of
Mm,
demarcation between good and evil in it. And there are lighter moments as well, and I think there is
sure.
also quite a lot of heart in that book as well. And so, but I see a lot of people labeling it as grimdark
So do
because
I.
it's got
Yeah, yeah.
swords
And
and
they're
people
wrong.
dying in it, and it's kind of like, but I
It
mean, I suppose different people have
it
different
is
views.
dark.
But
It's got dark themes for sure. But like, I mean, even
mm,
I looking at the arc of your book I've been sent, James. Like, it doesn't even look like, I can tell already it isn't grimdark, and I've even read
yeah,
the thing. Yeah, just looking at the cover, looking at the blurb, like having flicked
mm,
through a few pages, like you can tell immediately when something is going to kind of be I think the word grimdark, like so many things, morally grey, has just stopped meaning anything. It's just one of these
yeah,
phrases now that gets overused to the point of it means nothing. And as you say, I totally agree. I think it's now anything with any kind of like high stakes, and also these characters die, and also it's a bit grim at times. It's grim dark. Like it isn't.
mm,
It's just what
mm,
fantasy has always been to a greater or lesser
mm,
extent. I think what a lot of modern fantasy does, and it does very well, as distinct from say like the fantasy of the 80s and 90s, is it's a lot more internality to the characters. So you'll have characters. There's a lot more introspection. There's a lot more reflection on uh, overt reflection on the kind of the human condition, and the interaction between humans and systems in a way that kind of it, it delves much more into the kind of character studies through a modern lens, which I really like. And I think fantasy is one of the best mediums in the world to kind of examine the modern world through, which is what I enjoy doing, and
yeah.
I'm by no means unique in that. But yeah, as soon as you start making it a bit gritty or a bit kind of, yeah, it gets labeled grimdark. I don't think I would strongly resist Empire of the Wolf being like
I think
grimdark.
the biggest issue with the term grimdark is that no one really can agree what it is.
No,
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
this
that's
is
it.
it, and I think also I'm like I think David Gemmell I'm quite a big David Gemmell fan, and
Mm,
I remember he said once that if all you have are shades of grey, then all you
Mm,
end up with is a grey novel. And
mm,
I'm not personally interested in reading a grey novel. Like I've read some books which I think are technically excellent and have many qualities, like brilliant world building, brilliant plotting, and I should have loved the book, but I didn't quite get there because all of the characters are just so like just awful people that like
mm,
I didn't have anyone to root for. And I don't know, maybe just I like that kind of, I'm maybe a bit old fashioned in the sense that I need to have a character to root for, but I need to latch onto someone and be like invested in their kind of journey and want
mm,
them to succeed. And if all of the characters are just terrible and doing horrible things to each other, I do kind of end up thinking, what is the point here? Like, what
yeah.
if I don't care about any of these people or what happens to
mm,
who? Why am I even reading this? And that for me, it's like And I think this is something I've taken into my own work. It's probably because I grew up reading those classic epic fantasies that were published in the 90s or whatever, like where there's always a very clear line between good and evil. And like, there might be some kind of like blurring of the lines at times, but there's always a very clear sense of who the good guys are. And that's just something I always look for, and I've kind of taken into my own work as well. I just feel like it's important for me, because, you know, otherwise what's the point? I don't know. That's
Yeah,
just it's how I just feel about it. But
sure.
obviously, you know, again, your mileage may vary, but
So, while we're talking about this, as an author, what do you hope to achieve the most from your writing for yourself and also for your readers out of reading your books? Richard Swan, silent
Oh,
first.
Richard Swan. Okay. Phew. Uh, I was being polite. I was letting James go first. What I hope to achieve. I hope to. It's an excellent question.
mm,
I like to. I think the best advice any author can be given is write the book you want to write.
Mm,
James is absolutely correct in saying you should be mindful to a greater or lesser extent about the broader publishing world, but ultimately you always just have to write the book that you want to write and you want to read, because invariably that will be the best book you physically can write. And I just love. I have this whole thing about. I've talked about this a million times, so I won't go into it at length. But I used to, like so many people, I'll watch a movie or a like Hollywood movie or read a book, and there's this whole kind of like this kind of Captain America moral absolutism, like, oh, if we kill the bad guy in this way, we're no better than them. And it's this incredible ethical fallacy, which crops up time and time again in loads of modern media, and I'm fascinated by this. This idea of why don't you just blow Thanos' head off with a sniper rifle from like a kilometer away? Like that would obviously have been perfectly ethically permissible, from a consequentialist perspective. And so I love this dichotomy between consequentialism and deontologism, i.e., the kind of the end justify the means. And I spent my sort of teenage years. I was about, I think, 11 or 12 when the invasion of Iraq happened, and the whole war on terror was happening during my teens. And then I did a law degree, and as part of that law degree, I did counterterrorism, and I did ethics of warfare, and all sorts of things. So I find these, and so you have all these, this extraordinary rendition, and liberal democracy is kind of having to, or saying they have to at least, resort to all these kind of awful things. And I love those themes, and I wanted to basically explore those themes within a fantasy setting, which is exactly what I did. So what I looked for when I'm writing a book is, what do I find interesting? And this is nothing unique to me. Everybody does this. What do I find interesting? What themes do I want to explore? What point do I want to make? And I used to be, years ago, I used to be quite safe with my fiction before I was
mm,
published, where I would be like, well, I don't want to kind of nail my colors to a mast. I just want to tell a story. And these days, I'm more like, no, I want to make a point. Like, I actually want to kind of, say something with this fiction. I want to force people to think about an issue and grapple with it. And I want to kind of vent my spleen a little bit as well. Like, I get angry about a lot of stuff in the modern political landscape. So I want to vent those frustrations in the text, and I want to, make people think about it in the same way I think about it,
mm,
because I think I'm right,
mm.
obviously. So I'm kind of arguing the point. And so I think if a book is a fantastic way of, putting a point across. So these days I kind of, and I'll probably I'll lean more into this as the older I get, the less I give a fuck about what people think. But I think it's a wonderful way of, exploring themes and issues that have become increasingly important to me, and making the reader sort of grapple with them. And one of the most gratifying things I've seen. I don't read negative feedback for my books
Mm, yeah.
at all. But I read, but I do read the 5 stars, and I read them quite frequently because it's nice. Obviously it's nice. And one of the things I see frequently is people saying these books really made me think, about
Yeah.
the role of the law in our society, institutions and systems and civics and jurisprudence, and in a way that I hadn't before, which is tremendously gratifying. So I really liked that, and I want each of my kind of my series to examine a different theme in that vein. And that's just the whole thing. That's just me. That's my brand. So that's what I enjoy. So it's all of that basically. That's what I like to. That's what I like, and also entertain. And also entertain. We all like to have. I like to just have like one moment in each book where people talk about it. Like, there's a bit in book 3 when the guy gets his face ripped off, and I knew that people would hate that bit, and they obviously
I'm
did.
pretty sure I told you to take that
You
out, and you
wanted it to
didn't.
come out. James wanted it to go. I said no
I
because
just remember it, and I was like, oh my god, this
people are gonna.
even within the context of this extremely violent book, this just feels like it's gone over the line. But no, Rich was like staying. I was like,
It's
cool,
staying
all
in.
right, you do
It's
it,
staying in.
you do
There's
it.
got to be a bit. And the second book, I think I didn't want to draw people anyway, but I'd like to have a bit that you like to have. You know what? It's wonderful to have everybody say a book is brilliant. I love this book. I can't fault it. But also, weirdly, perversely, I kind of like it when there's an element of each of my books that is divisive. Because
Mhm.
it means that people are
Mm,
talking about it and they're having
Yeah.
conversation about it. And in the first book, it was largely it was the role of Mattas, and Helena's kind of romance with him. Like, that was a very divisive thing in the novel,
mm,
and a lot of people thought that was OTOs, without really kind of grappling with the purpose he played in the narrative and what he represented to sort of Helena and her state of mind. And in the second book, it was Von Volt and Helena's relationship and the
mm,
development of that, and a lot of people didn't like that. But you weren't supposed to like it. Like, I didn't want you
Mhm.
to like it. I wanted it to be weird and uncomfortable. It was an exploration of their power dynamic and how it impacted both of them. And so people reacted in some ways very viscerally. I remember like seeing the early doors. There was a couple of like 2-star reviews of them. Like, everything about this book was amazing except for the romance. And I was like, it's not a romance. It's not supposed to be a
yeah.
romance. So I like to have these storylines or those bits. I don't chuck them in to be controversial, but I kind of like it when there's a bit that gets people kind of arguing about it as well. That's always quite satisfying to watch as a reader. Even though a lot of the opinions will be negative or people will have reacted to it in a negative way, I like to kind of push people's buttons a little bit too and see, how I've managed to get under their skin and why and what it is about that particular thing that's kind of aggravated them. Which is also because of Machiavellian, but it's quite entertaining. So
it's
yeah,
it's it's important to explore things, though, isn't it? I
yeah,
think there is this kind of weird sort of situation. You see kind of reviewers sometimes being like, oh, I like, as you just said, Rich, I really like this book, but there was this one kind of like character who was racist, and I just I can't get on board with it. And it's like, that's the whole point. You're not meant to get on board with it. Like,
no,
the character who is behaving in that way, clearly it is there's serving a purpose. It's the
yeah, yeah,
author is interrogating that kind of mindset and is highlighting that why it's a bad thing. It's
sure,
but there does seem to be this tendency amongst some readers to kind of be like, oh well, there's a racist character in it, which means the author is racist. It's like, no,
Oh, yeah, yeah. Oh
it's
my
oh
god,
god,
not.
I
those
It's
hate
not
that. I
how
hate
oh,
fiction
that.
does not.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
not how
there's no
fiction
hope for
works,
those
right?
people. Yeah, my
Yeah.
goodness.
So but I think that does put people off sometimes from actually
Mm,
interrogating these really challenging issues,
mm,
that do need to be interrogated sometimes. And if you
absolutely.
can't do that in fiction, when can you do it? But I think authors are sometimes kind of really nervous to kind of engage with certain topics just because they fear the kind of the 2-star, 1-star backlash, as you said,
Increasingly,
Rich. And
increasingly
yeah,
so, I
and
think. Yeah.
it's a shame, because I think fiction does need. I think, as you said, Rich, earlier on, I think fantasy fiction is at its most pertinent when it is exploring real world issues. It's using the
Definitely.
fantasy lens to kind of reflect
Mm,
our own world back at us, and
mm,
to highlight things that just are wrong and need to be changed. But it's amazing how kind of some people just have such an adverse reaction to that. It's like, oh, it's a fantasy world, so it shouldn't have that kind of bad thing in it. And
yes.
it's like, but
Mhm.
what? So the point is to create a perfect world where everything's happy and great and awesome.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah,
again,
yeah.
really, what's the point of that? I mean, it's like, it's an interesting dynamic to kind of work with. And like, in my own work, I was very much like, I want to create a world where women can have exactly the same jobs as men, and there's that,
Yes.
like,
Oh, same. Yeah, yeah.
gender is not a barrier, and
Mm,
so on, and um you know um but at the same time, like, you have to have points of conflict. And I think one of the things in Silverblood that I kind of explore, and it was never intentional. I think it was more a case of, I wrote this book over several years,
mm,
and during the write, and I started writing it in 2015, so it was a long time ago.
mm,
And during the course of those first few years of writing, we had Brexit in the UK, which is just a massive kind of political kind of moment that caused a lot of distress. We had sort of the Trump election in the US, and you see, as a result of all of these political upheavals, the kind of the nature of power and the abuse of power became sort of a central theme in Silverblood, and that was never intentional. It was only later when I look back at it and I was like, oh, that kind of theme has crept into the work, and I never meant for it to. I set out to just write a book which was fun and full of action and an adventure, and kind of, because I grew up reading adventure stories and like being hooked on like Indiana Jones, all that kind of thing. And for me, like, fiction should be fun. I think the worst sin a book can commit is to be boring. Like, it should always be fun and enjoyable, and if it can be educational as well, or kind of thought provoking, then that's terrific. But I want that, but bottom line, it just needs to be fun. And so my kind of, to answer your question, Petrik, which is your original question, was what I wanted to do was just write something like I said, the kind of thing that I like to read, but just write something that people find fun and really engaging and pacey, and just kind of throws up all these interesting scenarios, and how are our heroes going to kind of survive these different things. So really, I was coming from a point of just wanting to write something that was fun and entertaining, but as I said, I think it's, we don't live in a bubble or a vacuum, and like inevitably real world issues have kind of bled into my writing in ways that I just didn't expect. And that's why there are kind of, characters that abuse their positions of authority, and there is a kind of a resistance against that, and a movement against that, and a movement to try and create a better world. And I don't know, like at times I was kind of worried about, is it a bit heavy handed? Have I kind of, push that angle a bit too far? Because it is really hard to tell when you're in the kind of in the middle of it. It's hard to judge whether. I don't want to be I don't want to, you don't want to be. I've read books where it's kind of like philosophical, like just it's throwing philosophy at you and political kind of views at you, and it's just so heavy that you're like, yes, I get what you're saying. You don't need to kind of just hammer it so much. And so I think that's something I was really aware of, like wanting to include all of these elements, but at the same time to just not be preachy, because I just can't stand that. So I'm hoping that I more just about got the balance right. So, but yeah, that's kind of, that's what I wanted to do, was just to kind of write something like fun and enjoyable. And I think actually I had a conversation with my brother, like sort of like about a year ago, and this was before the book got picked up. So I'd been on quite a long sort of publishing journey by that point, and I'd certainly been through the kind of like the sort of grinder a little bit. And my brother kind of said to me, what would success look like for you with this book? And I kind of said to him, I just want people to read it. Like, I don't even really care how many people read it. I just want some people to read this thing that I've written and have a good time with it. That really is all I wanted from it. It's pretty low bar, but the good thing with that is, once you've kind of achieved that, like everything else that comes after it is just a bonus, really. So I'm kind of, I always just wanted to have a book published. Like that's been my
That's
goal.
how it starts.
It kind of is, yeah.
That's where you start, and then the goalposts of what you want to achieve gradually shift and shift until you want, and then you want the mega success. Yeah, that's everybody starts there. Yeah,
it's
I
the
just
book's
want to
not
have a
come
book
out yet,
published.
so
Sure.
I just want to have a book published. The book's not come out yet, so maybe once it has, suddenly the goalpost will shift. But yeah, I mean, ever since I was like sort of 15, which is when I started writing in earnest, really, like that it's always been, I really want to have a book published, and it was never about being a superstar George R. R. Martin kind of thing. It was just like, I want to just have a book published. I want to be able to kind of walk into a bookstore and see my book in there and be like, I did that. That's my kind of thing. That was always just the goal, and I've in a month or two that will have been achieved, and then as Rich says, we'll see if the goalposts move. But like that's kind of all I really wanted from this, was to kind of get a book out there, and I've done that. So I'm very grateful to for that, and to everyone that sort of helped me along the way. So yeah.
I think those are great answers. And for what it's worth, for your book, I definitely had such a great time. You know about it already. And I wrote in my review, I talk about it. If the author's intention is to make this entertaining, then for me, he has achieved his job. As for Richard, for Richard, you mentioned something about thought provoking, right? I think I mentioned this as well, but I could be wrong. But I remember that something that Bresinger said in The Justice of Kings. I think that really opened my mind a little bit, because usually in fantasy we always read perspective from rebellion, right? From the rebellion, we're trying to overthrow the government and all that. And then Bresinger, something that well, I have seen what the world looked like without rules, and it's horrible. And that really,
That's one of my
yeah,
favorite
it is
lines.
true.
Yeah, I love that
Yeah,
bit. Yeah.
I really love that
Oh,
one.
good man.
So
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
it's really
No,
good.
I like that. I like that line. That was one of my favorites. Good
Yeah,
man.
because it is true. Without
Mm.
rules, we are savages.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. Yeah, yeah. There's a really good book called The Best Rangers of Our Nature by Steven Pinker, who's a Canadian philosopher, and it's very good. It's a very long book, but
Mm,
the whole conceit of the novel is how actually we're living in one of the safest, well, the safest time in human history,
yeah.
and but because of the relentless kind of media cycle, and you're bombarded with bad news constantly, you actually think that the world is a dangerous place. Well,
Yeah,
yeah, parts of it certainly are, of course, but like if you look at human history, it's it's nothing like as bad as like almost any other
Mm.
time, and it's you're the best. You're living your best life in the 21st century than you have at basically any time in the last 50,000 years.
yeah.
Yeah, I think it was the only term aberrations with the world wars, but like if you take those out of the data set, life has been getting safer and healthier for everybody, basically on a steadily upward curve for the entire of human
Mm,
history.
mm,
Which
mm.
always makes me laugh when I have these conversations with people. It's going to sound like I had this conversation quite a lot. I don't. Where it's like, oh, if you could live at any point in history, when would you do? And if anybody is going back before, like, 1980, I'm like, no, like, wrong.
No,
That is the wrong
no.
answer. As soon as you're getting back before the discovery of antibiotics, you've lost me. Like, you're mental. Like, you're welcome to it, but enjoy dying of a toothache. You know.
Yeah, yeah. I saw I saw on Reddit the other day. I think someone just posted it, and was like, "Oh, I love Skyrim so much. I just the real world sucks, and I just really want to live in Skyrim." And it's like,
Brilliant.
no, you don't. You absolutely do
Absolutely do
not.
not.
Like, like if the dragons don't like roast you alive, you'll be like just
Yeah.
shafted by some bandit on the road. Like,
Yeah.
it's terrible. The
Nuts.
food is terrible. Well, actually, the food might be all
Go.
right, but I mean, God, like, yeah,
Assuming
you
you're
just
having it.
you.
Assuming you have any food.
You're assuming you have any, yeah. It's just, I don't know. It's just
Yeah. Always
found
makes
that
me laugh.
amusing.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, I think this has been quite a great conversation. I really loved chatting with you, Richard, and also James.
Mm.
So for the last
Thank you.
question, what are you two writing at the moment? What are you two working on at the moment? I know that James, his debut is not officially out yet, but I assume that you're working on book 2 now.
Yeah, I am cracking on with book 2. The deadline, my writing deadline is kind of this, like ties like links up with the writing deadline I'm working to is the same as the publication date for book 1. So I'm kind of like, oh cool, my book's coming out in like a month, and then I'm like, oh shit, I've got to write the second book in a month. So it's kind of this weird dual kind of mindset. So yeah, I'm working on book 2 at the moment. It's going pretty well. Like, as I said earlier, I've had phases where I've just been like, this is terrible. I'm going to torpedo my own career. Might as well give up. But I've kind of come out that now, and I think I'm getting towards the final part of the novel, and I think I've like the first draft will, it needs a lot of work, but I think there's plenty of good stuff in it, and I'm feeling fairly good about where it's kind of coming out. And so I'm hoping the second book is going to be a bit like the first one, because my idea for this whole series was like, I really wanted to write a series where each book takes place in a different city, partly to stop myself from getting bored, but also so I just thought that'd be really fun for the reader to have each time a
Mm.
new setting and a new environment to kind of get their teeth into, and different world building, different culture. So yeah, the second book is very different to the first in the sense of like the setting, but I wanted the same thing again, where I want it to move the overall story forwards, but also being quite a self-contained narrative as well. So it's not like a jump on point. You kind of need to read the first one first, but you will. It's not like a middle book in a series. It doesn't have that middle book in a series feel, I don't think, because it has its own kind of self-contained story as well. So yeah, so I'm working on that, and I'm hoping, all being well, that'll be coming out next year. So yeah, so that's what I'm doing at the moment. I'm not sure, Rich, whether you can talk about what you're doing. So I don't think we've even
No,
announced it yet. So
no, I can't. No, you know what I'm working
Yeah.
on. You come up with the title for it yet?
I've got some ideas. Yeah, I've
Have
got some
you? Yeah, you're
ideas.
going to
So
share
I've got
those.
some. Not now. I'm not. They might be rubbish. I don't know,
Oh,
but
they
yeah,
will
no,
be. I
we
look
need
forward
to
to
talk about
shooting them
that.
down.
We need to talk about that next week.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I got a few irons in the fire. I spoke to you before we
Yeah.
started recording, Petrik, so you know the
Yeah.
secrets. But yeah, I'll have some news. Hopefully, James pulls
I
his
mean, you
finger
can
out.
talk about it if you want, Rich. Like,
No, I
there's
won't.
nothing.
No, no, no,
No,
no, no.
I won't. No, 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 no. Wait, 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 wait.
That's
that's fine.
It's another fantasy novel. The
yeah,
end.
yeah.
It's gonna be great. Well, it's gonna be great. I've I mean, I'm saying that with it sitting in my inbox. I haven't read a word of it, but I know it's going to be awesome. I have read the series pitch, and I think it's there's some really cool stuff in it. I'm really excited for it. So yeah,
you know what, I think it's cool. I've already though, I've looked back in it and I've like, I want to change that. I want to change that opening chapter. I think it needs to be switched to chapter 2. Like I'm already. I was like, no, just wait for James's notes. Like
I'm going to make a note, and I'm going to come back to you and be like, Rich, this opening chapter is amazing. You just don't just
you
leave it.
won't.
It's perfect.
Trust you won't. You're not going to say that. I know you won't. What you are going to say is, I think you need to delete the first 3 pages of chapter 1. But I know it.
We'll see. We'll see.
Anyway. Yes, I've got a fantasy novel coming out next year, Petrik,
Yeah.
which James needs to work on.
Okay, I
Thanks.
think I definitely can say that I am looking forward to both of them, and I wish you the best of luck in writing.
Thanks, Petrik.
Thanks,
the second
Petrik.
book, the second book in the Silverblood Promise, and also whatever you're working on, Richard.
Mystery novel. Oh, but
Mystery
some
novel.
title. It had a title.
Yeah. So I think that's really pretty much it from me today, and also from Richard and James. I just want to say thank you so much for visiting my channel. And for those of you who haven't read their books, the Empire of the Wolf trilogy is completed now, and you can order them, I think, anywhere. And also for the
Really?
Silverblood Promise, the book is almost out. It is out in April in the UK,
Yeah.
and also May in the
May.
in the US in
Mhm.
May. Yeah.
Mm.
So yeah, make sure to order them. They are all amazing. You can check out my reviews of all of their books. So yeah, and thank you so much, James. Thank you so much, Richard, for coming.
Thanks
and
for having you,
Petrik.
Petrik.
Appreciate it.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.